hemoglobin. When you woke up this morning, did you purposely say, I'm going to confine myself to a box? Or do you just avoid putting any conscious thought into today? When you're busy going at it, literally or figuratively, do you ever find yourself pausing for a moment to realize what's going on? Or are you just reacting? When you hear the saying, "May I have your attention, please," do you continue as you were, or do you consider the information you're about to receive might actually be valuable? When I was growing up, my mother used to ask me to do things, and sometimes her reasoning was, because I said so. Looking back, I wish perhaps I took the time to pause, think, and consider the ramifications of my choices. Good Monday to you. This is Monday, September 12th, 2016, episode number 1 of Pause, Think, Consider. I am your host, Jesse Liebman, and I am delighted to be here with you today on the inaugural episode of Pause, Think, Consider. There's a couple different things that I want to get into today. Ultimately discussing what is called the Pendulum Effect. But before getting into that, I did want to take a few moments to talk about ultimately what this project is about and how it came to be, and a few inspirations that ultimately got this project off the floor and started. Ultimately, I think this is going to be something that we can go back and look at, refer back to in episode 1, and see where it all started at. So the first individual that I wanted to send a huge shout out to and a thank you to is a gentleman by the name of Greg Day, based here in Portland, Oregon. I'm based out of Sherwood, Oregon. Greg and I have actually never met in person to this point, but he is the producer, the founder, the host of the weekly Portland podcast. And that can be reached at pdxpodcast.com. You'll be able to see all of these links about these individuals and check out all the things that they're doing at pausethinkconsider.com/pendulum. You'll be able to see all the notes from this cast and to check out all these individual websites. So again, Greg Day, weekly Portland podcast. And this is somebody that I met a couple of weeks ago. Ultimately, to give the full transparent background story, I was let go from my position with my former company and was really trying to figure out what it is that I want to do. What is my purpose? What ultimately do I want to do that's going to give me fulfillment each and every day? And I've tried the blog thing. My girlfriend, who I'll get to in a minute, Jean Dahlquist, successful at doing the blog thing. I've had ultimately, I think, 3 different blogs at this point that I've tried to do in a variety of different fashions. And they're all essentially like extinct dinosaurs at this point. Did them for successfully, I think the first one was ultimately for a couple months. The second one was maybe a month or 2. And the last one was the slowest of the 3, which ultimately lasted a grand total of 30 days after coming to a close. And there's something simply about blogging that I found just for myself personally, that motivation to physically write something. I've always found having writer's block to be very real for me personally. But yet, talking is something that we do on a daily basis, is something that I find myself, I will literally be driving in the car without any music on, and it will feel like I am in a symphony. There's so many things going on physically up in my head that I'm thinking about on a constant, habitual basis, that being able to speak and share those thoughts ultimately is something that just comes more naturally than physically writing them and putting them into a written word. So this is first and foremost starting off as a project of a means to do something different from the blog setting. Video, potentially utilizing some video, but I don't know how confident personally I am in being in front of the camera. Being able to physically leverage my voice and the spoken word is much more appealing from a semantic basis and just from really getting off the ground and making sure that's done on a daily basis. The getting up and physically writing something on every day, I have a huge admiration for those people that are able to do it. I was not a natural born writer. I don't even know that I'm a natural born speaker, but speaking for me simply comes much more naturally. And so where Greg comes into the picture is we actually had connected via on LinkedIn. Not sure who reached out to who, but in going through and having that discovery moment for myself and trying to figure out what it was I wanted to do, I wanted to look into what's some of the things that I've always wanted to do, that I've never had the time, that I've always wanted to try. And I poked around a couple months ago about maybe I should try this podcast thing. Maybe I should ultimately, instead of trying to do this blog that is like an abominable snowman just cast aside on the side of the road for domain poachers to find and people to go and research when looking for potentially having me for another employment opportunity, why don't I try something different? And Greg was the first person that ultimately I reached out to. And potentially was a little apprehensive at first. He said, Jesse, you can find more information on YouTube than probably you can get from me. But what I really loved about Greg from not only his standpoint, but from the actual podcast that he produces, is he's consistent. And that was the main thing that I wanted to do. There's another individual that I will talk about in just a few moments here, but that was what I was looking for. And there's nothing flashy about his podcast. There's nothing grandiose about it, but it's professional. It's straight and to the point, and he's consistent. He does it week in, week out. And so I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do this, that I could fulfill essentially the same thing that Greg does on a weekly basis with his podcast. So Greg was ultimately the first person that got this off the ground, whether he knows it or not. He was the one who was the source of inspiration of saying to myself, you know what, I think I'm going to go for this. I think I can do it. And really just explaining through several different emails back and forth as to really how simplistic it is and how easy it is to physically produce it. I'm going through it right now and learning a ton in terms of the semantics of everything, but literally it is just a microphone, or you don't even need a microphone, and a recording device, and hit record and away you go. And I love that simplicity of it, being able to share your thoughts and just get something off the ground. And so to Greg and the weekly Portland podcast, I just wanted to say thank you for getting this going. The next individual that I want to take some time to say thank you to, and indirectly whether he knows it or not, is a guy by the name of Travis Sherry. And Travis is affiliated with the Extra Pack of Peanuts. It's the extrapackofpeanuts.com. He has a podcast as well, which is on iTunes. Greg's The Weekly Portland Podcast is also on iTunes, so you can find both of those. I'll have links at pausethinkconsider.com/pendulum after this show. But Travis was really the first podcast I ever discovered, even though there's other people that I'll talk about in a minute that maybe are more prevalent, maybe more popular, maybe more successful, if you will, in terms of the broad reach that their podcast has. But Travis was the first podcast that I ever listened to. And where I came to discover Travis is my girlfriend Jean had finally determined where she was going to land. She's in the U.S. Coast Guard went through training, and determined she was going to U.S. Sacramento, was where she was going to be stationed. And living in Oregon, I wanted to visit her. I wanted to make a personal commitment to myself that every single month, within reason, I'm going to try and go see Jean. How can that possibly be affordable? I started doing the numbers and started to price it out. And even though Portland to Sacramento is about an hour trip, I actually just got back from it this evening. The financial burden of that was overwhelming, and being able to do that and uphold to that commitment. And so I thought there has to be a better way. And that's how I ultimately discovered Travis and the extra pack of peanuts. And he goes so much further and much broader than simply travel hacking. I think potentially that's where he started. There's more information about it ultimately on his website, but that's how I discovered Travis and the extra pack of peanuts podcast. He has other things like the Paradise Pack, which, full transparency, I have purchased and I am utilizing to the best of my ability. Have not gotten through the entire thing, but he does a multitude of things. But the great thing about Travis is his humility. And he really goes into and really talks about it in relatively graphic detail about his ultimate struggle for, in a similar situation to what I'm going through, of what he really wanted to do with his life, how he wanted to do things, and that there has to be a different and a better way to do things. And hearing that and hearing his passion through his podcast, it made it ultimately planted that seed of, this might be something I want to do. Here's a guy who is talking about something that up until a month prior to this, I had never even thought about. Like, I didn't even know there was the world of travel hacking, if you will. And if you're interested in what travel hacking actually is, I don't think that this project is really best suited for that, but you can certainly highly recommend checking out Travis's website, extrapackofpeanuts.com. More than happy to discuss it offline, but travel hacking was the thing that ultimately helped me discover Travis and his podcast, and is one of the more successful travel enthused podcasts that I've seen out there. The third person, and he's somebody I would consider a friend of mine, more so than anything else. Mentor might be a word, although that's something in future episodes that we can discuss, what the word mentor ultimately means, and is it overused and so forth. But Chip Conrad is somebody that I met about a year ago, and it was in a different job. He was working with a company called Lemonade Stand Days that ultimately is bringing entrepreneurism to the youth. And the whole concept is helping kids set up, building up, and it's a much broader program. You can check it out, lemonadedays.com. I'll have the link to it on the website. But that's how Chip and I ultimately came into discovering each other. And it goes much further and beyond that, because Chip is ultimately, he's one of the closest people I've got to in terms of having a living, breathing serial entrepreneur that I can physically have access and talk to and feel like I can ask questions and text him or call him or email him. And one of the things that was really inspiring and really helped me try and figure out what is it that I need to do is Chip's vlog. And Chip's vlog, I'm not 100% sure in terms of what number he is physically on right now. It's in the 260 to 80 range, I believe, roughly. Although I will link to it. It's a link that goes through to Facebook. But Chip, from a disciplinary standpoint, first and foremost, which is what helped inspire this project, and the same sort of discipline, is every single day, weekday, gives himself a break on the weekends, which I love and is what I'm going to do with Pause, Think, Consider. It'll be a weekday only inspiration, weekends for unplugging, further discovery, etc. That's not saying that I'm not working or concepting or thinking, but I really like that timeline. And so every weekday, Chip physically creates a video blog, if you will. And the topics are pretty broad. They're all over the place. It's very amusing. It's very well done. It's quick and to the point, which is certainly not what I feel like this project of Pause, Think, and Consider is going to be, but it's that discipline. And as Chip explained to me, you know what, Jesse? The last thing that I want to do is at the end of my day spend 2 hours or however much time he does in post-production and getting this damn thing up and launched. But you know what? It is knowing that I went through it and I did something, and this is something that I do every single day. Now, there's probably other things that you could say, like I'm going to put on underwear every single day. I'm going to brush my teeth every single day. But it's physically having that discipline. And I think the military is so great about this, and having that insight with Gene being involved in the Coast Guard, having a little insight into that ultimately. But that discipline of doing something every single day, it creates habit. It creates so many other wonderful things that you can build off of that momentum. And I couldn't figure out what it is that I wanted to do in that. And so when Chip talked about this vlog and I watched it and physically saw how it was composed and put together, I said, yeah, maybe I'll do that. And the thing that really caught me that Chip said is, you know, Jesse, you should do it. Absolutely. 100% go for it. He said, the problem is I've talked to so many people over the year, because he's only been doing it about a year. Again, every weekday, he's at about 280, so he's coming up pretty close to a year now. But he said, in the past year, I've had so many people that have said, yeah, I'm going to do that. That's a great idea, Chip. Let me do it too. And you know what? Nobody's ever done it. Nobody's ever followed through. And it's that follow through that I find to be not only the most difficult thing, but one of the most treasured things that you can possibly do, is physically making a statement of, I am going to do this, and then physically following through. So this is really partly a tribute to Chip and those words of physically following through and saying something that you're going to do. I said the same thing to Greg. I laid out ultimately a timeline when we were physically discussing that, hey, I want to do this podcast thing. I laid out, hey, I'm going to build a website. I'm going to get the Instagram. I'm going to write a post on LinkedIn and Medium. I'm going to have YouTube and have a YouTube channel. And then I'm getting this thing launched. I know it's going to take 3 to 10 days to get ultimately posted to iTunes, Android, and all of those things. But I'm doing this, and here is the drop dead deadline. I am launching, and we're going to meet hopefully within the next week to ultimately see the progress, but I'm going to have 2 of these done by the time you see me. And it's physically taking that spoken word and following through on it that so many people don't do. So this is really trying to find that thing that Chip does on a daily basis. The blog didn't work, as I discussed earlier. The vlog, it could work, but for me, the spoken word is ultimately where I feel like my personal passion is and where I can have the greatest impact. There's 2 other individuals that very indirectly have had an influence, but whether they knew it or not, whether they ever discover me or not, irrelevant, but they have been huge sources of inspiration. There are actually 2 other entrepreneurs as well. The first gentleman, his name is Tim Ferriss, and then the other is Gary Vaynerchuk. Tim Ferriss, one of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've ever come across personally. You might be familiar with his work by the 4-Hour Workweek. He's also the 4-Hour Chef and a multitude of different things. He can be seen at 4hourworkweek.com. And just his concepts of you can do really anything you want by just putting your mind to it and physically doing that work. What brings it full circle is Tim also has one of the most successful podcasts. And there's something on his website, if you go to it, I think it was 2015, he was voted as best business podcast or something to that degree. And when Tim started his podcast, I think it's in the 300 range in terms of how many he's done. He's not always consistent in terms of it being an everyday sort of thing. And even the time can fluctuate. I've listened to podcasts of his that are 30 minutes in time, and then there's ones that are an hour and 30 minutes. And maybe experts would say that format's not right, but I think the numbers don't lie in that he's pretty successful at what he does, and people want to listen to what he has to say. But Tim ultimately started his podcast, and he talked about this in his first episode, in that it was really a personal project that he wanted to do. And I think he gave the commitment of something like he's going to do this for 10 episodes. And if it goes into a dumpster dive and blows up and is a car crash, then so be it. He can say that he did it. He learned something about himself. He learned about podcasting, so on and so forth. And he's at however many episodes he's at now. And it ultimately just started by him interviewing people that were his friends. Kevin Rose, I think, was one of the first podcasts that I ever listened that Tim did. And it might even be the first episode that he created. And it was really just two friends talking, essentially, over wine. And they might have been fairly inebriated by the end of that thing. But here's two highly successful entrepreneurs that are just talking about anything. And it's interesting. And that's ultimately where the inspiration comes from, is as long as you put something out there that's interesting and inspiring, then people will come and people will listen. But how he physically has gone through the discipline, again, that Chip talked about and laying in, Tim is somebody that he's the antithesis of it. He's somebody that does it, lives it, breathes it on a daily, weekly, annual basis. And so looking at the semantics of how he's produced it, how he's put it together, his website, his promotions, all of those things have been something that I've been studying and analyzing and trying to utilize in this project of Pause, Think, and Consider. The other gentleman that I mentioned, Gary Vaynerchuk, is, well, the only way that I can describe him is you just have to go watch some of his keynotes. And I will link those again, pausethinkconsider.com/pendulum. We'll have a couple of Gary's keynotes for you to get the flavor of who he ultimately is. He's very raw. He can sometimes be considered vulgar, if you will, using colorful, crass, what have you language, very in your face, straight to the point, brutally honest, if you will. But Gary, ultimately, I think the line that he's used that really has been most impactful to myself is stop doing stupid shit. When you think about that and that line, stop doing stupid shit, it makes you pause for a moment and think, okay, well, what ultimately is considered stupid shit? Is it me being on Facebook for 15 minutes every day? Is it me tweeting about where I am, utilizing Foursquare to check into every place that I eat at? Like, what is classified as stupid shit? Is it, and how do you quantify it? I think it's something you ultimately have to look at yourself, and what it comes down to is what your goals are. If what you're doing isn't leading you to your goals, isn't leading you towards your aspirations, then it's not really being productive. And he just talks about doing work. And Gary's story is very interesting in that he took over his father's liquor business transformed it ultimately into an online wine business, grew it from something like 6 million to 50 million, and utilized it by essentially internet promotions marketing, setting up his own YouTube. He's very prevalent, very popular on Snapchat, something that I personally haven't utilized or discovered. I've got plenty of friends that have. At some point, I want to get into it just to see what it's all about. And he is all about doing work that luck is not the word in terms of when you look at people that are successful. He believes that behind everything, somebody has done the work. And you don't just fall into situations that you're fortunate or lucky. That behind everyone who's successful, ultimately they've put in the work. And so, as I told Greg, I've put myself behind the 8 ball, but I've done it for a reason. Because in looking at myself and a lot of these failed blogs or a lot of ideas that I physically had that haven't come to fruition, I don't know if it's necessarily fear. I think there's a little more soul searching that ultimately needs to go on. But what I do believe that it being is needing to put yourself out there. And I've heard so much about, this is very big in the dieting world, if you will, or maybe the training world. My sister's very much into CrossFit, and setting goals and aspirations is very big in that world of, I'm going to do X amount. I'm going to set a PR here, a PR there in certain activities or lifts or what have you. But physically putting yourself out there to hold yourself accountable, saying, I'm going to reach a certain weight at a certain time. Well, for me, I put myself out there, and I know Gary gets thousands of emails on a daily basis, and he claims that he reads them all, and I believe him when he says that he reads them all. So I'm sure he's read my email that I sent to him, but I essentially told him my story. Hey, I'm Jesse Liebman, lost my job, trying to figure out what it is that I want to do. I'm going to do this podcast thing, and I'm holding myself accountable that I will check up within a 30-day period of time, and I will show you what I have. And I'm going to do my absolute best in terms of getting everything set up, and I don't know where I will be at. I don't know how many episodes I'll have. I don't know if it'll be crap or not, but you know what? I'm just going to do it. And then I'm going to follow up, and I'm going to show you that I did it. First and foremost for myself, but also I'm holding myself accountable. So whether Gary and I ever have an interaction, pretty irrelevant. Because again, going back to what Chip's idea is that doing something on a daily basis, gaining that forward momentum of having that creative being that you do day in, day out is what I want to establish. And finally, last but certainly not least, my girlfriend, Jean Dahlquist. As I mentioned before, U.S. Coast Guard, living out of Sacramento. We've been together for over 3 years now, coming up on 4 in February. And Jeannie, very successful at her blog. It's p3bgirl.com. And she would more than likely describe me as an inspiration for her blog and starting her blog. That's not to try and take credit where credit's not due, or trying to say that I was the only inspiration or why she wanted to do it. But again, it was an accountability thing for her, that she wanted to make sure that she was ultimately staying on a budget. And she, not necessarily in a bodybuilder sense of things, but really wanting to make sure that she's somebody that's very athletic, loves lifting heavy weights, and wants to look a certain way. And it's kind of that CrossFit mold, if you will, but doing that, being a vegetarian and being on a budget is something, when she started trying to do the research, she didn't find anything out there. So first and foremost, it was an accountability thing. Hey, I'm going to post on a weekly basis what my grocery bill is. Here's what I've done. I've got a set limit, and I'm going to hold myself accountable and show it to the world. Some people would say, well, I don't really care how much money you spend on your budget. But again, it's not about other people criticizing or looking at Jean saying, oh, you spent too much money. Why did you go buy mayo? Why did you get a chocolate bar? Irrelevant. It's for herself. And then if it can help other people, she's always posting recipes. And while there isn't a lot of interaction in terms of comments or shares or so forth, I hear from friends of mine that their mother loves Jean's blog, which I think is crazy. Like, your mother who lives in Port Angeles, Washington, is reading my girlfriend's blog who lives in Sacramento. They've never met each other. Like, that's amazing. But she's so disciplined and so consistent. I remember being on vacation out in the Bahamas or Florida or wherever we were at the time. And she said, I got to get this blog posted. And I'm like, Jeannie, we're on vacation. What? No, Jesse, I made a commitment and I'm sticking to it. And that is so inspiring. And so I want to fall into that inspiration. But really, where Jean's biggest help and the motivation to ultimately doing this is the ranting, if you will. And as I've gone on here now for quite a while, I can talk and I can go on and on about subjects, especially that I am passionate about. And so she thought if there was some way that you could harness what it is that you're talking about, that you can display this to the world, other people would listen. Now, I don't know if that's right, wrong, indifferent, true, not true, what have you. But I do know from, again, trying to do something on a daily basis that the spoken word comes much easier than the written word for me. And so just a huge thank you to Greg, Travis, Chip, Tim, Gary, and Jean for getting this going. And this episode, more than likely, going to be longer than others because I had to get out of the way a bunch of thank yous and to how this project ultimately came to be. So as I've described on the website, on Facebook, Instagram, what have you, all over the place, that I am trying to break down and look at philosophical and social norms to open up other people's curiosity, because I really believe that we don't take the time in our daily basis. We are so overwhelmed and flooded by overloads of information. We're so in the grind, if you will, just our daily semantics of what we do on a daily basis, that we don't actually stop and think about anything. And I found myself even doing it at times, like, oh, I don't have the time to think about that. I don't have the time to read about it. And it ultimately comes down to priorities. What are the priorities? And if you don't physically take any time to look at what your morals, what your ethics, what your beliefs are, how can you physically go through on a daily, monthly, annual, lifetime basis and know truly who you are and truly make progress and improvement? And I don't know an individual that I haven't talked to that just wants to be better. I don't know anybody necessarily who says, you know what, I just want to do the same goddamn thing day in, day out, no improvement. I just want to wake up in the morning, slide into the desk at the office, get out and go home and just do that every single day. Maybe there's individuals out there, but I would hope if you're listening to this that you want more from life. You want more from life on a day in, day out basis. And one of the things that I've found just throughout my entire life that I really enjoy, I really feel like has helped shape who I personally am, is taking time to think. And maybe at the time I didn't necessarily appreciate it, with my mother always making me walk home from school, but those were some of the fondest memories of just thinking. Again, when I'm in the car now at this point. I know a lot of people listen to the radio. Hopefully there might even be a few people that are listening to this right now as they're driving. But for me, I sit with the radio off. I don't have headphones in. And yet, as I mentioned before, everything is like in stereo sound. I've always got things running on through my head, always things that I'm thinking about, trying to figure out. And by not having that cloud, if you will, of just white noise in the background, it frees you up in order to think about things. And that's what I'm trying to do. Ultimately, first and foremost, just like my girlfriend Jean, this is a personal thing that I'm just holding myself accountable. On a daily basis, I want to talk about something, anything. And that anything being something that opens up other people's minds. If you get through this and you take the time for 5 minutes, maybe you're only able to listen to half of this show, if you will, half an episode a day, week, month, whatever it is, but it physically makes you stop and think. And even if it maybe isn't on the topic of discussion for that physical day, but it makes you stop and think, then I've accomplished the goal that it is that I want to do. And so for today, what I want to talk about, despite going over what my ultimate goal was for time, hoping to try and do this in 30 minutes a day, so you're not having to listen for an entire day to get to the damn point, is the concept called the pendulum effect. It's also considered the pendulum law. It's a physics law that was discovered by Galileo in 1602. And this is off of Wikipedia. I'll link to it again, pausethinkconsider.com/pendulum. It describes the regular swinging motion of a pendulum by the action of gravity-acquired momentum. But where it comes in and where I think it applies further and beyond that is that the theory holds to trends in culture, politics, that it tends to swing back and forth between opposite extremes. And the interesting thing about it is how it is fabricated in our society. And whether we really take the time to think about it or not, there's a lot of different and very interesting examples that are out there that I think can apply not only to our lives, but also to our daily jobs and what we find ourselves passionate about. So the first example that I want to use is in business. And this whole concept of convenience. And I posted a photo the other day via Instagram about Instacart. If you're not familiar with Instacart, Instacart is essentially what was back in the day homegrocer.com, which flamed up, was not successful. Kind of a similar concept to that, but essentially where you can purchase online, schedule, if you will, for pickup for various different shops, the items that you want, and somebody else will pick it up and deliver it to you. It's like the Uber of shopping, if you will. If you haven't utilized it, I haven't personally utilized it, but I know friends, family members that have and love it for the convenience standpoint. I know I'm familiar with it from Whole Foods. I'm somebody that's shopped at Whole Foods, utilized them, and I know that they're a huge proponent of Instacart. So here's this whole concept, if you will, of building this business that is around seamlessly through mobile or online. And really, it's most prevalent through mobile because that's where the convenience factor comes in, that I can physically go on my phone and select that I want 4 apples and a steak to show up at my house that then I can cook and make for dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever for that night. But with that, and we've gone to such a degree because we have so many things going on in our lives that we now all of a sudden we don't even have the time to go pick up our damn food. that we're going to cook for ourselves. We can't even cook for ourselves. There's so many, whether it's Blue Apron or several different companies out there that essentially will send you food, prepackaged food. The Schwann's is one that I remember growing up that was very prevalent in the neighborhood. The neighbor across the street would always get chickens and foods and milk and all sorts of things from there. I never really understood that, because for me, physically going to the grocery store and picking out what it was that I wanted was it was an experience. It was something that I really enjoyed. But people have tried to essentially align, and something, as I explained, that Gary Vaynerchuk talked about, stop doing stupid shit. Well, for some people, going to the grocery store and picking out their apples would be stupid shit. They make $500 an hour doing whatever they are, and they work 20 hours a day or 18 hours a day, and they don't have damn time to go pick out what they're going to eat. They just want it there. They consume it in 2 minutes, and then they go about their day. So convenience has been growing, and it's more and more prevalent. Less hands-on, more hands-off, more automated. And I use the example of physically Whole Foods and leveraging it for food, because that's something that's core to me. But I'm sure there's plenty of other examples that you can think of in your own personal life where convenience is a huge factor. We're an app-driven society. And what's interesting about it is we've really lost the art of customer service. And I had a really interesting conversation with the Uber driver that I utilized this past night in order to get home. And I talked to him about how successful ultimately he's been. And he's been very successful. His wife is in the Philippines. He actually flies over there every 3 weeks. So imagine that. Every 3 weeks, he's in Portland, goes back for 3 weeks, comes back, and every 3 weeks he's back and forth. Having that convenience of being able to have a job like that, that's a part-time job, not his full-time job, but being able to turn something on and off, huge deal for him. But in those 3 weeks that he's here in the States, in the first week, he's able to pay for that airplane ticket that he utilizes. But so I asked him, I said, well, what is your secret? Like, that sounds, from all the articles that I've read, and there's a lot, and I will link to one that absolutely obliterates Uber for how they treat their drivers and what they're able to make and so on and so forth. He said, I feel like in this area, in the Portland area, they're very good. They're very savvy. He said, but there's so many people that they just don't know where to go. They don't know how to talk to people. They don't have any customer service. It's just, I want to make money, and it's me, 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 me. And they're not thinking about the customer. And that's where, in a reference to the pendulum effect, in how business has gone so much to automation and getting rid of that customer service, I really do believe, and it's interesting because there's companies starting to pop up there that are trying to go this direction. They're trying to go more towards a customer service base. You look at here in Portland, they're also in LA. They've probably got a couple different places. Salt and Straw. Not the greatest ice cream in the world. Just going to put it out there. Dairy-free ice cream eater here, so I don't have as many options as maybe other people. But the thing, in my personal opinion, that makes Salt and Straw as successful as they are is that customer service experience. It is an experience when you go to Salt and Straw. Is there better other ice cream that you can get out there? Sure. There's plenty of gourmet boutique ice cream shops that you can layer it with whatever it is that you like. My girlfriend Jean, very much, she needs as many toppings as humanly possible. And so when we go to Salt and Straw, they have to have brownie, fudge, all sorts of crap in it in order to make it appealing to her. But Salt and Straw, the thing that really struck me the first time that I ever went there, not only was the line that was literally down and around the block, and you're thinking, this really can't be that good. Like, it's not possible that it's that good. And when I had it, I was like, you know what? This is pretty good ice cream. But for me, what made it was that customer service experience. When I finally got in the door and I finally got up to, oh my God, I'm finally going to get to eat this ice cream. I've been waiting for a flipping hour in order to get a goddamn scoop of ice cream. Like, this better be worth it. And then around from the counter came our, I don't even know what they call him. Maybe it's a scoop specialist or my ice cream specialist or whatever you want to call them. Physically came across, said, hey, I'm so-and-so. Welcome to Salt and Straw. Have you guys ever been here before? I said, no, it's my first time. I'm like, oh man, we are so happy to have you here. Like, welcome. Like, we are so excited for you to be a part of this experience. What can I get for you? And they literally went, and for me, it was like a sorbet and some coconut milk based ice cream. For my parents, it was a couple things for them. But physically having that human interaction, having them bring me on literally a silver spoon that ice cream and trying it and being like, wow, you know what? I really like this flavor. Can I have this? And then they went, hand made it, if you will. And that whole like hand scoop, it's marketing. It really is by saying somebody hand scoop something. I'm physically in my own mind praying to God that they washed their hands and, you know, didn't go eat Chipotle beforehand and didn't scrub under their fingernails. Like, I'm hoping that the hand scoop experience is not going to give me dysentery, but it really comes to fruition in Salt and Straw. And if we were to flip that pendulum effect it the other way in terms of ice cream experience and trying to make it automated, convenient, what have you, well, I should be able to get Salt and Straw via Instacart, essentially. I should be able to pick that up and never even have to walk out my door. I should just get, you look at Amazon Prime as a prime example, if you will, of you literally never have to leave your house ever again to get anything. And when you have free shipping and free returns, it is so convenient. Like, you can literally use your house as a dressing room. That whole concept of malls and physically going in and having that tangible, I can feel, touch, smell, taste, whatever it is that I'm purchasing is gone. But I see it coming back. And as a bit of a Renaissance person, I love how technology is being utilized in order to make our lives better, to make it more efficient, in order to allow us to further optimize. I'm an optimizer myself, but I appreciate good customer service. And so seeing companies like Salt and Straw, and again, I'm sure there's plenty of others out there. That's just the personal example I'm using because I had a positive personal experience there. But I believe they're going to become more prevalent. We're going to be able to utilize technology in order to make things more convenient, more automated for ourselves. But customer service is coming back. I really do believe it. I don't think it's ever going to completely go away. I don't think there's going to be a time when you go to a car lot and you're talking to C3PO or what have you, some automated system in order to buy it. Yes, there's websites and maybe there's whole industries where they completely get rid of humans, but it will never replace certain industries. There's always going to be something where having that human interaction and physically talking to people is going to be needed. It's going to be desired. Maybe generationally, because my generation is so terrible at having conversations with people. We're so enamored in our phone. They'd rather text message or tweet or Snapchat with the person who's frickin' right next to them that maybe it doesn't seem as prevalent to them. But I really do believe that from a customer service standpoint, the pendulum is going to swing, and it's not going to be all about having things as fast as humanly possible. One of the other industries that I think this is prevalent is in food. And again, looking at from the business standpoint of convenience to customer service for food, it's speed and quantity versus experience and quality. Kind of the same thing. Probably could use the exact same examples, but I look at Costco. And maybe Costco isn't the fastest experience in the world because you've got people that are literally getting their 6 months supply of groceries in there. And as me, I am one of the rare breed people that I literally walk into Costco and I get one damn thing. I go for the organic walnuts and walk in for 2 pounds of walnuts for whoever the hell knows, whatever it is, $13 or it's got to be more than that. And I get looks from people like, that's all you got? Did you find everything okay? It's like, I don't need a 6 month supply of lube. Thank you very much. I don't need a 12-month supply of dried food that I could bury in the yard in case the apocalypse comes, okay? I don't want 12 pounds of line-caught salmon that came over on the barge from Costa Rica or wherever the hell it came from. I don't need that. But for many people, again, it's about speed, and it's about having the most amount of food you possibly can get. And I actually like this restaurant, but to use it as an example, Claim Jumper. We have one here, pretty local, about 15 minutes from my actual house. And it is one of those sort of Texas size style food. And their portions are ginormous. And I know that's not a technical term, but if you've ever been there, if you haven't, go look them up. Claim Jumper. I'll leave a link on the website, pausethink.consider.com/pendulum. But it's huge. And the value for the food that you get, I remember when going with my parents, it's like, man, I am stuffed. And despite being 5'8", 145 to 55 pounds, like I could put some serious food away. And I know growing up, it was not the most economical thing in the world for my parents to try and feed me. And so even carrying that over into the adult world of just always having a high metabolism, finding places that have large quantities of food. That's why buffets are so popular, because you can get for a set amount basically unlimited food. But Claim Jumper, very quick in terms of the portions that they're making. They're actually one of, for their portion size, one of the faster line cook places that I've ever been to. And the quality was actually pretty good, but it's mainly the speed and the volume of food that you're getting that I always thought about. But in thinking about it, okay, if I can get it this fast and I can get this much food, and they're making a profit, what quality of food am I really getting? Is it really that good for me? And something I can talk about in future episodes that will tie in my ultimate story in terms of health and my progression across there, irrelevant to this, but it has changed in terms of relevant to food, what I have gone for. So from going to volume, while I still eat a lot, very voluminous in terms of how much I wind up eating in a general daily basis. Again, like Salt and Straw, it's more about experience and quality. And as I mentioned, I used to be a very, very prevalent whole food shopper. And I've started to switch. I grew up, if you've ever heard of it, if not, again, I'll put a link to it, Winco. Winco was the place that I would go shop, and that's just where our family did. It was for the amount that I was eating. It was the place we had to go to. It wasn't Walmart. It wasn't in terms of quality. It wasn't at that level, but they were the place that we went to for food ultimately, for a lot of the produce that we got, because it was fairly decent quality and the prices were amazing. Costco wasn't around that early, so Winco was the main place that we did our shopping. Costco became more prevalent. When I moved out and ultimately had my own decisions to make, Winco was initially where I started going. Then I started to realize and discover, there's a lot of pesticides that are used in certain foods. And there's different growing practices that's utilized. And all these different documentaries came out about food. And it was like, okay, I need to buy something that's a little bit higher quality. Let me go to the new seasons. Let me go to the Whole Foods. Okay, I'm paying a premium, but I'm getting something. Their apples just look so much better. Now, as I've learned, well, part of that's staging, and that's good marketing, just like anything else, but they provided a value to me in terms of quality, and they provided a great shopping experience. Winco, it very much has a Walmart-like experience. It's just get in, get out, employee-owned. Their floors are cheap, crappy, like very easy to clean, but it's not a Whole Foods in terms of the experience. And then I've taken it to another level, another stage. And there's a co-op, a food co-op here about 4 miles from my house called Our Table. And super interesting concept in that it's 100% organic farm that then they leverage and they utilize in order to sell essentially a farm store. So everything that's in their store, well, I shouldn't say everything, but the majority of the items that they sell in the store are directly from their farm. And as a result of that, and not only talking to the owner, but in talking to the employees that work there, and actually their prices, like if you compare it to a Safeway, a Fred Meyer, a Ralph's, or I'm not sure what's prevalent on the East Coast, but they're comparable to better, because when you have that direct from farm to consumer, there's no middleman, there's no shipping. There's literally, you go pick it and you put it on the shelf. And so from a cost standpoint, it's going to be much, much less than the distribution of trying to bring something in. And so for certain items, because it doesn't cost very much for them in order to actually produce it, it's going to be less. Other items, yeah, they're costly, because growing a 100% organic item is not cheap, and it takes labor, and it takes sweat and blood and all those things in order to create it. But you know what? The experience that I get from that, and literally being able to walk out my door, get on my bicycle, and ride up the road and get something that grew in the ground 4 miles from me is amazing. And it's an experience that I can't get at Winco. In fact, I don't know where the hell any of their produce is from. It's probably from Mexico, it's from Puerto Rico, and that's not to say to downplay anybody that physically shops there, because I realize I'm personally in a position and I've made the personal sacrifices and choices in order to shop there. For other people, it's not as prevalent. They don't believe in the organic. They don't ultimately see the value. And with the pendulum effect, in terms of everything and the trends of the way that things have gone, I really do believe that experiences and quality are going to become more and more prevalent than just volume. You look at the way that we live, our houses, our cars, our transportation, our food, our businesses, so forth. Everything is predicated on convenience, speed, cheap, and just doing as many possible human things as you can. You look at even growing up and calculators. I remember the first calculator I ever had, well, all it could do was multiplication, addition, subtraction, maybe a square root if you were lucky, and then upgrading to Texas Instruments like a TI-83. I mean, that thing is a literal computer. Like, I remember I got dumber to the standpoint of when I started using that thing. Even though my mother told me, like, oh, just use it as a check. Well, guess what? I didn't, because I wanted to go outside and play, and I could utilize this machine to literally automate and do all of my homework. Well, that didn't benefit me. I didn't realize how it was ultimately affecting me until many, many years down the road. And I think some people are starting to discover what all these conveniences that we're afforded and what it's ultimately doing not only to ourselves, but to our environment, to our society. And things are going to start to change. They just, it's natural in the way that things swing back and forth, that it goes from one extreme to the other. But I'm really curious to hear if anybody else has had experiences like this. I'm curious to hear, has anybody noticed, or has anybody taken the time or thought in how they physically conduct their day and the modern conveniences that they have, and how it ultimately affects them? Do they enjoy that? Are there other things that perhaps you're switching back to? You're saying, you know what, this is less convenient for me. Maybe it costs me more. Maybe it's something that ultimately might not even be better for you, but you get sheer satisfaction. You feel like you're helping yourself, you're helping your family, you're helping your environment. It's much bigger. It's one of those things that, well, if you tried to explain it to me, I might not understand. You wouldn't understand, Jesse, but it's a benefit. I'm really curious to hear about that, because I've shared my personal experiences in terms of how this pendulum effect has affected me and in my life, and I'm curious to see how it's affected you. So, as I always try and do in these episodes, is really take that time to pause, think, and consider. And for today, it's about pausing, thinking, and considering the pendulum effect. What things in your life have you noticed that have changed over time? Is it for good? Is it for the better? Is it ultimately benefiting you and your goal? I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen today. Again, please check out the website at pausethinkconsider.com/pendulum for more information about all the things that I talked about today. And I look forward to talking to you all tomorrow on Pause, Think, Consider.